Hello everyone. So today I would like to share a little bit about my experience of living with and having a child in the autism spectrum. So this is something I haven't really shared too much publicly, but it has been something that I've been experiencing for the last probably 8 years. So my son is now 16. When he turned 8, suddenly there were a lot of changes in our lives. Well, especially with me as well, there are a lot of changes in my life. So during that time of huge transition, I realized his behavior started to become a bit different. I mean, there are many things and many factors that could be contributing to why I was seeing all of these behaviors during that time. But generally speaking, we've been moving house, so we've changed where we live, and he has changed schools, so there's a huge difference, in everything that we're familiar with. Throughout his childhood, I've realized that he doesn't really take change very well. He doesn't cope with change very well. So whenever he knows about a certain fixed schedule and it's going to be changed and he's noticed or he's notified about it, then he gets into quite a big reaction. So anyway, the move itself was actually his choice, and so therefore with that choice came all the really settling in and the adapting and everything. And I realized that from a very sociable, or maybe that's not the completely accurate word, but a person who was very outgoing, very open, he changed into somebody who is actually quite quiet. And how I realized that he may be in the spectrum was, there was one time when around that period as well, he was very much into video games, and that I could see affected his emotions hugely, and it affected me hugely as well, because I was very sensitive, especially during that time, but actually all the time I'm very sensitive, and therefore I didn't know how to handle it, and I was absorbing a lot of information about how video games are very harmful and bad, to a child. So in my huge overwhelm and reaction, I reacted to my son one time when he was playing video games, and in that there was a huge reaction that exploded from him as well, and therefore in the end we ended up in the hospital. And it was then that actually I found out that he may be in the spectrum. So we found out in a quite a dramatic way, of course, and it wasn't easy to handle, and it wasn't easy to actually have the support of my family to actually accept that this is the case, because of course it's a huge losing of face of having a child in the spectrum who didn't seem to actually have many problems when he was young and growing up. And throughout these years I realized then, not only just my family but myself included, that it was a huge gift, because there were so many things in my life that I didn't want to see, and that I didn't see them. I didn't see the truth of them, and it took quite a dramatic way for me to actually see what really was going on. And of course it wasn't easy to accept, but I did, and I learned throughout these years how to deal with the situation and handle it. So in the beginning, everything was very, very bleak and gloomy, because nobody could accept it. You know, most difficult maybe was for my son, but it was also difficult for us because my family didn't really support us through this, so we had to do it alone. And yes, we did. So I contacted different professionals, people that I trusted, to learn more about the situation. And both of us, my son himself, you know, as well as I, we researched, you know, online and understood about the spectrum, the diagnosis a little bit more. But other than that, you know, that was part of it. But the main situation and the main focus, or the main gist of how Ashley felt really that I appreciate this situation today is not all of these facts or knowledge. They did support me to a certain extent, but they didn't help in a way that eased my heart, basically. So what did ease my heart was, during these few years, I realized I had a non-existent relationship with my son when he was younger. I thought I had a relationship with him. I thought it was pretty harmonious. I thought we were pretty happy together. But then I realized that was only what I want to see, and it wasn't actually the full truth. The truth was we had a lot of dependencies on each other. We had a lot of needs that wanted the other to fill, and they all felt too grievous for me at that point, because that was not what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for a relationship that was non-existent or that was fake. I wanted and only want a true and real relationship with him, with myself, and with anybody in my life. So I embarked on what I felt was kind of an impossible journey of re-imprinting, reliving a relationship with my son that felt like completely impossible, because at that time our relationship was basically really, really bad. It was like we would not talk. We had so many judgments on each other, and he was always on his phone. He still is today, but during that time it is almost like I'm living with him, but he's not there really. So it was very painful, and whenever I want to call him, or you know, talk to him on the phone or chat to him about something, he would hang up on me, and he would cut me off all the time. And I started to accept the situation, even though it was very painful. So for a few years we were in this really conflicting situation, but I continued to live my life. I continued to live my life in a loving and lovely relationship with the people I work with. I started a program of asking strangers on the street to take photographs of me just so that I could open up connection and not go crazy from a lack of connection within my own home. I knew connection is so important in my life, but I wasn't gonna give up if it didn't happen in my own home. And I didn't want to give up on myself, and so I started to open relationships outside of home. For some reason, I had a strong feeling of knowing that if my son was to reject me and our relationship, this could not, and it should not deter me from opening relationships and connections with the whole world. because the whole world wants to and is waiting for my connection. I could not allow one person, even though I'm very attached to him and he is very important to me, to hold me back that way. So essentially, I opened a deeper connection with myself and with everybody around me. And a couple years passed, and during this time I met my now husband, and we began a relationship together, and eventually we were married, and therefore we moved in together. So all throughout this time, my son was still, he was still diagnosed the same, but he started to change from a non-speaking relationship between us. He started to, I felt, come back with an appreciation for me suddenly. So he started to talk to me. He started to call me. He started to not hang up on me, and we started to have a relationship, although he doesn't talk to my husband, and he still doesn't talk to my husband today. So this is just part of my experience throughout this time. But what I wanted to say, or the point of all of this, is I want to share that a lot of people think Asperger's children or people with Asperger's is that they don't know how to socially communicate. But the thing is, throughout all of these years, I had to take the first step, because that I don't give up on my son or myself or the relationship between us. I started to open up and took the first step to understand my son, who is then very much in resistance towards having a relationship with me. He was basically shutting me out completely. So I took a lot of time to observe him. For example, I wanted him to communicate to me in my way, or the way that I'm familiar with or that I'm used to, which is through speaking, or maybe sometimes through body language, like hugging. But he refused all of that. So I just observed in how he communicated with me. So throughout the years, he has a little his way, his own way of communicating with me is, first of all, he touched my leg or kicked me softly, gently underneath the table when we ate dinner together. So I realized that was one of his ways to talk to me or to show affection towards me, as well as he would tickle me. Yes. So all of these ways which are not my way, or ways which I'm not, familiar or used to, I realized were his ways, and I accepted them. So every time when he did that, I'll give him a big hug, and I'll use my way, show my way, how I talk with people, or how I communicate with people. So in that, it was very lighthearted, and it was very lovely, it was very fun, and we started to hit it off, basically. And so throughout these years, this was how we began, more of a real communication or connection with each other. Until today, we're really close. I mean, I'm still understanding him a lot, and he's still understanding me. And at times he would tell me that he doesn't understand me at all, and he hates that. And at times I would be a bit frustrated, not so much anymore, but we have a really lovely relationship, today. One that a lot of people don't understand, but we communicate well. Sometimes he would tell me there's no point to tell me things because he thinks it doesn't matter to me, which I would reply, but it is not up to you to decide whether I want to hear something or not. It's my choice, to want to hear something or know something about you, and that's why I ask. So he has the right to not reply to me, but I have also the right to choose to ask. We don't always get an answer, but we are every single moment non-ending, non-endingly understanding each other further. So my experience or the difficulty or the challenges that I faced throughout these years is what I know or what I've experienced with my son, and I know that it works, is not being shared publicly or openly, and that's why I'm doing this video. Because for many years my family has rejected the idea that my son has Asperger's, so they do not want to know further about how he really is, or how this the spectrum, how people in the spectrum actually function or how they are. So there's a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions, which then they can judge. And during the judgment, my son feels all of this judgment and realizing that they don't want to understand him further, and therefore as a child he fights back or retaliates by not wanting to understand them either. So I know as a parent, you know, in my own experience, that we need to take the first step. We do need to take the first step, yeah, to understand, to open up the ourselves, you know, to open up our world, to know that there are people in this world who think differently from us, who think very differently from us. But that they do exist. They are part of our world. They might be part of our family, like myself. They might be part of, you know, our school, our community, our, you know, different groups. And they exist, and they're very much a large part of the community, that the numbers might be bigger or higher without, you know, with some people not being diagnosed, you know, officially. So what I want to say is, it is really important to understand this, that children or people in the spectrum, they are not rude in the first place. They're just really scared that the world largely is not how their world is. So they very much need a lot of support. They don't need to be babied, but they need somebody to be there so that they can trust, to support them, that they understand that no matter how different we are, that there's somebody there to understand them and to be willing to open conversations with them and to understand them deeper. They might not, children in the Asperger's or the autism spectrum, they might not want you to understand them sometimes, but you're there always to understand. So when they do find there is this need or necessity, they know you're there. They do want to let you know a lot about what they're interested in. And you are there also to listen to that. And of course, this is the best place. It is the best place to actually start building a relationship, is to listen. Is to listen to what they're interested in, what they want to tell you about. Whether it's something that you want to hear or that you're familiar with or not, it doesn't matter. But the thing is, if we're open enough, if we open ourselves enough, we would love to hear. We would love to learn about people in this world who are different from us, because that is how our world expands. That is how our life expands. And that is how huge our hearts are. Yeah. So whether it is with people in the spectrum or not today, I always carry this reminder with me in life. And it is, there are a lot of people, there are many people every day in the world that might be very different from me. But I have the openness, and I nurture this openness in myself to understand them more, to listen to them. And of course, you know, I say no to their behaviors. If there's any abuse, just like I do the same with my son. Sometimes, in a quite fun and light-hearted way as well. Sometimes in a firmer way. It really depends. But there's always this openness to know. There's always this openness to not just think the world is how I know it to be, because the world is not just that. The world is much bigger. The world is much larger. We have such a huge potential to understand so much more, to know so much more, and it's a really joyful thing to allow ourselves to do that, because when you're doing that, you're letting the world in, you're letting people in, you are exchanging love, all the time, and this is what is very needed in the world, and this is what is very needed with people in the spectrum, because you can imagine, if you're the minority of the world, and the world in general appears to be so strange and so weird, to you, of course you would be really scared. Of course you would want to protect yourself. Of course you would want to hide, or want to protect, or want to be angry, or want to, like do things, which are strange, So with this understanding, we can allow people to come back, allow each other to reconnect, but it really starts with ourselves.